Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm so happy to be part of this event. Such a great organization. And I brought along my latest novel, The Underground River, but I thought I would read from my current work in progress because I think it is more in keeping with the topic, Pursuit of Happiness, Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. So the novel's working title is The Anatomy of Desire, and it centers on a young woman named Vida Tenney who decides to become a doctor, and this is just after the American Civil War. Originally, Vida Tenney's name was Vida Dre, but then I realized as a doctor, her name would be Dr. Dre. So, yeah, that had to change. Anyway, this is the opening scene, so I don't really need to explain much, except that her father is a doctor who's been hiding himself away ever since Vida's brother was killed in the last battles of the Civil War. And also, Vida has not yet decided on medicine as a career here. So, The Anatomy of Desire, Chapter 1. It was the very worst thing that could have happened to her. Not the Boston man, who was probably already dead when they brought him into the house, but the conversation afterward. Although watching her father try to revive that poor man was awful too. Vida was half fascinated, half repulsed, and before everything fell apart, she found herself grateful that biology, her own chosen field, was so much less traumatic. When they brought the man in, she'd been sitting on the front stairs in a shaft of sunlight, reading Charles Darwin's On the Origin of the Species. Not a new publication, the war had interrupted all English imports, but newly arrived in Larkside. She used the last of her birthday money to buy it. It was a thick green leather volume with gold leathering on the cover, and inside, creamy pages filled with rows of dark print, like so many ants marching from one idea to the next. She was still reading the introduction. We shall see how natural selection almost inevitably causes much extinction of the less improved forms of life, when she heard the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel drive and a man shouting, "Dr. Tenney, Dr. Tenney." Her father's office, once a front parlor, was directly across from the staircase. Vida knew he was in there hiding, as he did every day now. She had been on the stairs on purpose to catch him when he came out. As she closed her book and stood, the front door banged open, and two men carried a third man into the house, his arms flopping listlessly toward the floor. Was he dead? Maneuvering, they knocked over the little oak table with its double-wick lamp. Now there was glass on the floor. "Dr. Tenney," the man shouted again. "Dar?" Vida called. Like her brother and sister, Vida had always called her father Dar and her mother Mitty, her older brother Freddie's attempt at saying their names, Arthur and Marie, when he was a baby. Her father's office door scraped open, and he appeared in the doorway, unshaven and wearing the same gray waistcoat he'd been wearing for 3 weeks straight. For some reason, he looked at Vida first. "Stop shouting," he said. Sherman Tillings, who owned the Saddlery and the public stable and had a wife named Thankful, was at the injured man's head. Vida didn't recognize the other man. "We was just changing horses for the Boston coach," Mr. Tillings explained. "He collapsed on the porch, didn't say a word. Where can we set him?" Her father directed them to the long sofa against the windows in his office, where the light was best. "Not one word," Mr. Tillings went on, lowering the man onto the green velvet upholstery. The man's left arm swung down, and Mr. Tillings moved it up over his belly as if he were already posed in his coffin. Just a crash as he fell. "You see where his forehead is swelling? A Boston man cracked the rail." The man's face, closed eyes, open mouth, had a waxy tinge, like skin on hot milk. Surely he was already dead. "What can I do?" Vida asked. "Should I fetch something?" She had no idea what to fetch. "Hush," her father told her. By now he was sitting on the stool next to the sofa, and he put his ear against the Boston man's mouth. He straightened up and pressed 2 fingers against the man's limp wrist. No pulse. He told the two men to prop the fellow up as he opened a bottle of whiskey, pushed back the man's head, and poured a glug down his throat. 2 uneven streams ran down either side of his neck. "Get a hot poker, lay it against his head, that'll shock him awake," Tilling said. "First blow tobacco smoke into his mouth," suggested the other man, the coach driver, who was small and freckled with wiry red hair. Vida, standing back against Dar's bookcase, felt useless but pinned there by the drama. Her father began massaging the man's chest. "Maybe this will work the heart up." "Work it up?" she asked. She wasn't being sarcastic. She wanted to know what that meant. "Go get a blanket," he told her. When she came back into the room, they were pushing the Boston man forward and back, bending him at the waist as though he were a lever. Her father told her to cover his legs, and they stopped long enough for her to do that. Close up, she could see that the man's eyes were not altogether closed, although he was clearly unseeing. He had a very round face with a cluster of white warts under one eye. As she pulled up the blanket, she touched the top of his hand. It was still warm, but he looked dead. Of course, she thought, it will take a while for the blood in the body to cool. The 3 men began again to pull him up and shake him, set him down, pull him up. Meanwhile, her father was getting angrier and angrier, as though the unlucky man was clinging to death just to vex him. At last, Mr. Tilling stepped back and took off his hat. By now, the Boston man's mouth was fully open. No one knew his name. "Christ," her father exploded. "Why did you bring him here? I can't help him." Thank you. And I just wanted to say, if you're interested in finding out when this comes out, I have an email sign up, an orange sheet by my book. Thanks.